everybody. I'm Sheila James, storyteller. I'm in San Francisco on a sunny day in June of 2015. But I'm going to take the story back to Hawaii, where we lived for many years, and where I worked part-time for about 8 years at the Hawaiian Mission Society's historic houses, or buildings actually. There were 3 of them. When you work in historic buildings, you get paid. You are not a volunteer as you are in museums. And the pay scale when I was there was the minimum wage plus $1. You worked from about 10 in the morning giving tours. The last tour would be at 2:30, and they would last about an hour. Over the years, there were a number of incidences that have stayed with me as some great fun and some, well, history. The missionaries that went to Hawaii that are known as the missionaries were Protestants from New England, and they went to convert the native Hawaiians to Christianity. Now, the native Hawaiians had been having visitors from Europe and North America since 1778, and the missionaries arrived in 1820. The royal people accepted the missionaries because they brought their women with them. All of the other ships that had come to usually winter over in Honolulu Harbor were just men, and they brought all kinds of problems. And the Queen Kaha'anu liked the missionary women because they helped with illnesses and actually with the clothing that went on to the Hawaiian women. The tour was pretty standard. It wasn't scripted, but you were limited to what you had available. And when I started to work there, James Michener's book, Hawaii, was still very popular, and people would come to take a tour, many of them with the book Hawaii in their hands. In my training to be a guide, it was really stressed that we had to stress that the book was fiction and that it was based on various happenings, but it really was fiction. And that wasn't much of a problem until one day I was giving a tour, about 12 people, and most of the people on these tours didn't know each other. They might come in pairs, they might be 3 people, but the rest would be strangers to each other. And before we started, one of the women holding the book Hawaii in her hand asked me if she could ask me a question. And I said, of course. And she said, I've just spent a great deal of time in the cemetery of the church, which is across the street, and part of this story of Hawaii, and I can't find the grave for Mr. Hale. Hale was one of the missionary names in the book Hawaii. Now, I felt I was in a kind of quandary. If I told the truth, I would put this woman down and embarrass her. But the other people would not know the truth, and I felt it was my obligation to tell her that there was no Mr. Hale, that many of the names in the book Hawaii were names common in New England, but they were not the missionaries' names. And the woman really pushed me, and she kept saying, I know that there was a Mr. Hale, and I just want to know where he was buried. And I said, there was no Mr. Hale as a missionary. And she got really very huffy and said, yes, there was, and his house is across the street. It even has his name on it. It says Honolulu Hale, H-A-L-E. And I said, I'm sorry that I have to tell you this, but that is not Hale here in Hawaii. It is a Hawaiian name for Hale, house. That building that is Honolulu Hale is where the mayor hangs out. It is just part of the system. And of course she was embarrassed and everybody kind of chuckled and off we went. Of course, many people did have lots of happenings that weren't true. One day, it was a very hot day, and it was the trade winds weren't blowing, and it was an afternoon tour of high school students from a public high school. Not one of the really tough ones, but it was a Kaimuki high school, and they were not noted for their interest in scholarship. And to make it even worse, they came on my tour following a 1-hour tour at the palace, Iolani Palace, which I, who have taken tours all over the world, feel is one of the dullest tours you can take. So here I had about a dozen or a dozen and a half high school students, bored stiff, very hot, and their teacher. So we start off and go into a house. I do the kitchen routine, and I got a lot of yawns and eyes that didn't focus on me. And I said, well, we'll go upstairs. I'll show you the bedroom. And the stairway was curved, very steep, and we crowded into this small bedroom, and everybody is beginning to perspire. It means really hot. And in the room, they had a chair and a bed, and the bed had curtains. And under the bed was the kind of a bed that you pull out. And I explained that this was the main bedroom. And the couple that lived there would sleep in the top part of the bed. The children would be they would pull out the bed from underneath, and the children would sleep there. And if guests came, then they would have the top bedding. And the curtains were used for privacy. And babies were born in that bed, and people died in that bed. And they said, of course, they had sex in that bed, but it's really pretty hot day to have sex. And one of the high school girls just burst out, oh no, it's never too hot to have sex. The teacher looked at me to see what I was going to say, and I just burst out laughing and said I thought that was awfully clever of her. So the tour kind of lightened up, and it wasn't quite the disaster I had thought it might have been. The tours, you never knew what you were going to get. The number of people, or what kind of people. I had one man say that on the tour that King Kamehameha, who was the first real king of all of the islands, well, not Kauai, and that King Kamehameha was just like Hitler, and they should have killed him earlier. And there again, you stop and say very firmly that King Kamehameha was not like Hitler. He was a king, and he did have wars, but we would discuss this later if he wanted to, and he didn't. I had a tour where I think everybody on that tour yawned. Their eyes didn't focus on anything I was pointing to, and I thought, what a dull group of people I have. I tried everything, including the sex story. They didn't laugh. And I couldn't get them to really be part of any of it. No questions, no comments. And at the very end, we're outside by a pump, water fountain where you pump water. And they didn't want to take their turns doing that. So I finally quit and thanked them for coming. Hope they would have a good time in Hawaii. And I started off. And one of the women ran after me and said, wait, I want to tell you, thank you for the best thing that has happened to me in Hawaii. You can't imagine. I've tried to think what could have happened to make that tour the best thing that had happened to her in Hawaii. As a side story that goes with James Michener, who was more commonly known because of South Pacific. He wrote the book, they made theater, made movies, and it's recently been redone again. He was in the Pacific and the South Pacific during the Second World War, and he became very enamored of Japanese woodblock prints. And after the war, he began to collect these woodblock prints. He decided as he got older that he really shouldn't be the custodian of these prints. And he would give them, he decided the place for them was the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And he was at that time living in New York. So he made an appointment with the curator of Asian art and drove over to, and at that time you really could drive and park behind the Met. I have done it. But he got caught up on some one-way streets, and a police officer came up to him and said, "Hey, bud, you're blocking traffic, move on." And Michener said, excuse me, but I'm trying to get to the Metropolitan. He said, "Move on." So we went home. And so that's going to be where I'm going to have my prints. So the next time he was in Hawaii, and he was writing the book and had made friends, and he decided maybe the small museum in Honolulu was the place for these Japanese prints. At that time, the museum was called the Honolulu Academy of Arts. It's now called the Honolulu Museum of Art. But he got made appointment with the Asian curator, and got in his car and got stuck on the one-way streets, which Honolulu has, like New York. And the police officer came over to the car and he said, "Hey, brah, can I help you? Are you lost?" And Michener said, "I'm trying to get to the museum." And the guy said, "Follow me, I'll take you there." So he did, got parked, saw the curator, and gave 6,000 prints to the museum. But as an aside, to that aside, the curator of Asian art from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts came to the museum to give a workshop and a talk. And at the end of the talk, taking questions, he was asked if Michener had offered the Boston Museum of Fine Arts his collection of 6,000 prints, would you have taken them? And the curator said, "Well, I wasn't working at the museum at that time, but I would think that they would have said no. They already had all of those prints." You have to remember that Boston was the big sailing ship port, and the sailors would come back with all these goodies. And New England has wonderful Asian art, but the best Korean art outside of Korea is at the Honolulu Museum of Art. And I think that's enough stories for today.